Welcome to Clienting, the place to get information about legal marketing and client development in the digital age. Here are your hosts, Gyi Tsakalakis and Kelly Street.
Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of Clienting. We're very excited today to have with us a prolific lawyer podcaster that's going to talk to us about niche practice, podcasting, content online, and why video plays a role in podcasting. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest, Rob Schenk. And Rob, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what listeners should know?
Thanks for having me. My name is Rob Schenk. I am a trial attorney based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and I am in a two-person firm, and we concentrate in the area of nursing home abuse all across the state of Georgia. And for the purposes of this podcast, I think that the interesting bits is that in terms of marketing, a lot of our marketing is geared towards video and online SEO. We spend a good deal of time and energy in that, and that led us down the rabbit hole of not only video FAQs, but a video podcast.
Yeah, I definitely noticed in looking at your website as a digital marketer, I was like, oh yeah, I can see what they're trying to do here with these video titles and the podcast titles, that you're really definitely playing to the search engines and search queries with your titles.
That's right. So I think in terms of the journey, where we started was just trying to identify essentially who our client is. And our client, we realized, is generally female, generally the daughter, the wife, or the granddaughter of the actual person that's been injured. So we researched that and figured out what questions they would be computing into Google. So we designed, at first starting off on our online marketing, we designed short video FAQs to quickly answer those questions. And we got really excellent results from that.
Yeah, that's such a good point too, that I think so many lawyers tend to overlook, is spending the time to actually doing the research on who the audience is, right? So some attorneys might assume, especially if they're just getting started, don't have a lot of experience in the space, that they might be thinking, oh, we got to target people who are actually in nursing homes. But, and this, I think, a certain amount of it stands to reason that it's actually the children, and in particular, as you mentioned, daughters, granddaughters of folks that are in nursing homes. So I think that's a really good kind of pull-out point that it's good for listeners to think about, is who really is that audience? And what were some of the ways you sussed that out? Were you doing like focus groups, or was that just Search Console data research? Was that kind of your CRM data that you had from having clients over the years?
I wish it was the focus groups. No, that would be in the future, having them focus groups. But no, it was from the CRM data. We don't have so many clients that it's a forest. We can see the trees. So of the several dozen clients that we have, we just go through it and go, well, who's the point of contact? Who's the person that found us? And with that data, in terms of the ones that found us online, that data revealed that it's generally a woman, age 40 to 60, and it's their parent, grandparent, or spouse. And because of that, that would influence the direction we would take in the marketing, the references we use. You know what I mean? Like, you can't reference Rihanna in your blog post. You got to go back in time, maybe reference Chaka Khan. You know what I mean?
Right. Smart.
Even the references going down to there, I love that. I'm wondering about the keywords that you guys chose to use and the titles for the different videos. How did you know? Because you have some very specific 2-minute quick little videos on the website. How did you come up with thinking about the different titles for those? How are you keeping track of all that? I'm always fascinated when people have such a robust kind of content game plan.
Right. So it's kind of two parts. The main way that we find the material for the FAQs is from the clients. At some point during the client experience, we get asked, a certain number of questions, and that's where the FAQs come from. And a lot of times it does get specific, like, Rob, like, what are the signs of sepsis? That you would, it's strange, but we get asked that because a lot of our clients, from a result of a UTI or a bed sore or whatever it is, sepsis results, and maybe at some point that's what they were looking for. And definitely when they come to see us, that's kind of an answer they want to get. The other half of it comes from just different avenues that you can take using Google or different websites. So if you go to Google, you type in bed sore, it's going to try to populate what the rest of that phrase it thinks that you're going to ask. And so from there, formulate the FAQs from that. There used to be a really good website that you could get for free called Answer the Public, where if you type in a keyword, it gives you all the most relevant ways that people are searching for that keyword. And so we would get FAQs from that as well.
Yeah, I've talked a little bit about Answer the Public before, and that was definitely a good little one. There's also, I know Gyi could probably speak more to this, but Moz and Stat.
Correct. But Answer the Public isn't free anymore. Like, you got to pay for that. It's like, man, I'm so cheap that I don't want to do that. I think it's the results are free anywhere but in the United States. So you can find out like the keyword queries in UK if you want to for free, but not the United States anymore.
Right. And just to expand on what Rob's talking about for folks that might not be familiar with this process, but in trying to identify the types of queries that people are using that might be relevant to your practice, as Rob mentioned, you can start typing into Google and Google will give you autocomplete. So it'll show you a bunch of other queries that, if you say like, what are bed, and then it will have a bunch of permutations that might include sores and other types of questions that's from their Google system data. So it gives you a sense of things that other queries that people are entering into, which are great to build frequently asked questions around or build video around. Another thing that we like to recommend is the people also ask section. So some queries Google will populate people also ask results, which shows more varieties of questions that people are asking Google. And then the related searches at the bottom is another good source of keyword data from Google. And like Rob mentioned, that stuff's all free.
That's right. And in our experiment, and again, I am no master at this. I'm not an expert. I haven't been to the hill and back on none of this. However, I've found that the days of trying to rank for nursing home lawyer Atlanta, it's no one that seems to be searching for that. At least the good clients that we get aren't searching that. They're searching literally these questions, can a nursing home staff member be liable to my loved one? Things of that nature rather than just a general query.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And the other thing that I would follow up, and it goes back to your original point, is really understanding your audience. And so, if you're tending to trying to attract a more sophisticated audience, you're going to find that the more sophisticated queries are probably going to lead to better engagements for potential clients. And, it makes sense. Someone that might not have be doing a lot of research or is doing a business lookup, or maybe some of those what we would call head term searches, tends to be less sophisticated than someone that's searching for whether it's a specific injury, type of illness, the liability aspects. You can even identify your audience based on the types of searches that they perform. And I think that's a really good point for folks to think about. And, interestingly too, everybody seems to be fighting over this handful of head terms. And so it's super expensive to try to rank for those versus these longer tail queries, question-based queries, which is really the most wide way that Google is used is for research queries. And so those tend to be a lot less competitive as well. So it's a lot easier to actually gain visibility for those.
That's right. And I like that term, head turn. Yeah, that's pretty good. Head turn. We could bank breakers is what I would call that.
Bank breakers, even better. I like that even better.
Yeah.
So we're talking a lot about keywords and very specific keywords. And I want to talk about your very specific practice area, which is nursing home abuse. But I also saw, Rob, that you used to practice in an area of wedding industry law.
That's right. When I graduated in 2008, I went to work for an international business law firm, which was a great firm, but I wanted to go out on my own. And so I took kind of the education I got in business law and started my own business law solo firm. And from there, I niched down into the wedding industry just through circumstance because I happened to have dated a wedding photographer and I got to know that industry, and that kind of blossomed into speaking engagements and becoming kind of a noted quote unquote expert in that field. Talking about like what happens if the wedding cancels, do you get to keep the deposit? What happens if somebody comes into town, steals your trademark, this kind of things that were specific to the wedding industry. And then over the years, we transferred over to a strictly personal injury practice. And then we slowly niched down from personal injury into nursing home. And in terms of marketing a practice, I've always found that the riches are in the niches. And it's better to be, in my opinion, to go narrow but deep. So I got my business improved once I started cutting all the other business areas out except for the wedding stuff. And the same thing has happened for our injury firm is that we used, if it was a slip and fall, it was a car accident, trucking accident, premises liability, we would do all that. And we are now far more successful because we've cut everything else out. And I could go on for an hour about the reasons why that is, but that's kind of where we're at. I learned a lot marketing the wedding firm that I'm applying to the nursing home practice area in terms of the marketing components, going out and speaking and making sure the blog is specific to that area. So I learned a lot doing the wedding stuff that I'm applying now with the nursing home stuff.
Yeah, I happened to just last weekend actually meet a woman who is currently doing, she's a fairly new lawyer doing general personal injury, but would like to end up in wedding industry law on more the provider side,
The vendor?
Representing the vendors?
Yes. Yeah. She wants to represent more the vendors.
Well, more power to her, man. It's a great practice area. That's what I did. I represented the vendors in their contractual matters. And actually, I get requests to speak on wedding industry stuff, which I won't decline if it's someplace cool. Like I got basically a paid vacation to go to Thailand last year to speak about that at an International Wedding Planners Congress. So there's still some fruit from that, but yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, but in your current practice area, how are you getting those speaking engagements and where are you speaking at? Because I'm sure nursing homes do not want you to enter their premises, but there may be some other good places to get that kind of clientele.
Right. So the speaking engagements that we do with regard to the nursing home practice is we try to figure out who would benefit from the information that we have, and we identify that as a classification. So, for example, we recently spoke, when I say we, me and my law partner, we recently spoke to an elder law division of either the Atlanta bar or the Georgia bar, I can't remember, about what an elder law attorney would need to know about nursing home abuse lawsuits. So, for example, we talked about when an elder law attorney is drafting a healthcare directive or a power of attorney, you want to address the fact that the principal, the person that's requiring the document, should not waive their right to a jury trial, which would prevent the nursing home from requiring arbitration. You want to address the fact that the principal, the person that's requiring the document, should not waive their right to a jury trial, which would prevent the nursing home from requiring arbitration. So 3 or 4 or 5 key things like that an elder law attorney might not know because they don't do nursing home abuse law. Those are the kind of things that we try to address when we go out and speak, that kind of thing. And hopefully the result of that is that, these guys know what they're doing. I deal with people that are nursing homes all the time. Maybe if somebody gets hurt, they'll send them our way because we provided them with value.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's the thing too, that I think is so important for listeners to take away is, one, you're getting so much more out of, sharing knowledge. Like, at the end of the day, except for maybe some specifics, trial tactics, sharing that kind of information with people, you're going to do a lot better making those connections, becoming the subject matter expert, becoming a referral from those firms than you would if, so many lawyers still take this kind of approach of, oh, well, I don't want to give away the secret sauce.
Oh, man, no way, dude. Like, I wasn't the person in law school that was trying to hide the library book that everybody needed to complete the assignment. I'm posting my outlines, and to the extent that anybody wants my outlines, to the class. Like, anything that I have, anybody can have. People email me stuff. I'm more than happy to get them everything I got because, that's, obviously we want to stay in business. We're trying to make money, but at the same time, like, I'm in a practice here where, like, something that I share might help somebody get recovery or it might take a nursing home that's bad out of business. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a community effort as well. And a lot of the attorneys that I really admire share that same philosophy, and they're still rocking and rolling, getting huge verdicts. So, I'm with the mindset of sharing everything that I have.
Do well by doing good.
That's exactly right. And I was going to say, like, even the lady, Kelly, that you met, if she wants copies of my stuff, I'm more than happy to send it to her if she's listening. That wants to do the wedding stuff. Yeah.
Well, if you are listening, you know who you are. So definitely contact me and I will get you in touch with Rob.
Even though you are very modest about your expertise in this, you are way ahead of the curve. And so I think it'd be beneficial for listeners to hear some of your thoughts on why you actually chose to include video in the podcast versus just doing audio, which a lot of other businesses do.
Man, I think it's Joe Rogan's fault because Joe Rogan has one of the most downloaded podcasts ever, but I've never listened to a minute of it. I've only watched it on YouTube. And so, like, that was one of the first podcasts that I was ever exposed to. And I was looking at it, I was like, man, this is pretty cool looking. Like, I think this would be cool to do. And so that's kind of half the reason. The other half of the reason is, well, if I do a video podcast as opposed to just a standard audio podcast, maybe there's more likelihood that somebody will see it. And in my mind, again, like, I want to be cool like Joe Rogan and have, guests on there that you can see, people talking and things like that I thought would be a lot more interesting in terms of somebody consuming it than just the audio. So that was kind of the genesis of it. I mean, I figured that the more eyeballs, the more ears I can get on it, the better it would be for me.
Yeah, I think also just kind of going along with that, one of the things that folks don't realize is like Tim Ferriss does the same thing. But if you want to get eyeballs on places like Facebook, no one's going to click through podcast links on Facebook, but there are a lot of people that are going to watch a video that's running. And so if you have a video podcast and you run captions on it, I can't remember what the stat is, but there's some overwhelming majority of videos actually don't even no one's listening to the audio. They're just reading the caption on the video as it goes through the feed on Facebook. So I think that's another compelling reason to do video as well.
Yeah, actually, I just saw a video before we started doing this podcast of same thing. I found myself, even though I was in a place where I could listen to it with no problem, I didn't turn it on. I was just reading it, even though I could hear it. So yeah, there's something about video. Everybody always says video is the future. Video is the future. I agree with that. Hopefully, by the time video gets here and it is the future is now, then we'll be set up for it. But I will say this, even though there's that benefit to the video, it is so much harder to produce a video podcast and an audio podcast. There's so many things that I didn't even think about. Just like having to fake, because we batch our video podcast together. First of all, the video podcast, it's weekly and it's 30 minutes. And generally we have guests. So like, I think at this point we have maybe 60 to 70% of the episodes are guests, but we want to try to get to 100% guests because it's so much easier to just ask somebody questions rather than come up with the content yourself. But, the things that I didn't think about with the video podcast are like, okay, I have to tell my law partner, bring 6 different jackets to work because we got to make it look like we're filming these things on different days. I don't know why I think that's important because nobody really gives a crap, but like, I still kind of like to try to have that, continuity and make it appear. I used to, when we started doing it originally, I would grow my beard out. And then we'd film like 1 episode or 2 episodes, and I kind of shave a little bit, and then come back in, and we'd call the next guest, and to make it and change clothes. Just little things like that. I mean, that's dumb, but I don't know what I don't know. You know what I mean? So that was one of the things that we encountered doing a video podcast. You know
what? Random superpower I like to think that I have is that I have a weird memory for what people wear. So if I were tuning into your videos and watching all of them in a row, I would definitely be like, they recorded that all in one day.
Well, Kelly, I'm going to throw this at you that even on a lot of times, the background, we shoot the podcast in our library. And so in the background is like a bookshelf, and I'll try to change the books around too sometimes. Sometimes I don't, and then I have to pour the coffee from one cup into a separate cup. I don't know why I care so much about it, but maybe there's a lot of Kellys out there. There's a lot of Kellys out there that might care.
It's the same thing I would do. I'm right there with you.
Excellent.
I appreciate it.
So another question I've got, I think you alluded to this, but I always like to pose questions for the skeptics, right? So there are lots of lawyers out there that are thinking, what is all this stuff, this podcasting and YouTube? Are people really out there? How do you validate that this is working? Is it as simple as people are calling you and saying, hey, I saw your video, or are you doing some kind of more sophisticated tracking? Or talk to us about how you make the business case for your firm that this is actually working.
Man, that's the rub. That's the rub, Gyi. So the goals, I'll answer the question. That the goals for the podcast were just to create value to the potential client, educate the client, help us with SEO, right? Because we transcribe the podcast dialogue that goes on the website, and hopefully Google tracks that. And then kind of to establish us as kind of the thought leaders. In terms of the ROI on the podcast, at this point, no one has called as a direct result of doing a long tail search and pulling up the podcast, watching it, and then calling us. However, we have closed clients specifically because it was a differentiator between us and another firm.
Right.
So they'll call and be like, hey, listen, we looked at other law firms. We saw that you guys have a podcast, have videos and stuff like that. So that shows that you guys know what you're doing. And that's happened, a handful of times. So the ROI is there in terms of that, but not as much as I would have thought it was. And actually, to be quite honest, what I'm finding out now, every episode, if we get 100 downloads or 100 watches combined over all of the different mediums, then that's fantastic. But in terms of the audience, anecdotally, it seems as though the audience actually is other attorneys and ombudsmen. And ombudsmen are generally, depending on the state, are volunteers that advocate on behalf of nursing home residents.
You know what I love? I love like specifically three things about what you just said. The first is that you know that you have not had anybody call and say, hey, I listened to the podcast. That's exactly why I'm calling. But you know who is listening to it. And the third thing is, you guys are 90 episodes in and you are committed to this process. You know, this is part of your strategy for SEO, for content, all of that stuff. And so you're not doing this willy-nilly. You guys are not just like, oh, we'll throw it out there, throw it at the wall, see if it sticks. You are tracking it to make sure what is working and what isn't. And you are continuing to go ahead with it and really kind of making this a long-term marketing play, which is awesome.
Don't make me out to be something I'm not, Kelly. It is a lot of times willy-nilly. If you go back to the first 25 episodes, it's crazy stupid. We do, it's not the quality. I like to think it improves over time. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, it's really time consuming to do it. And as you said, it's a long-term strategy. And although 90 episodes are out at the time that we're doing this, we've already got 100 in the can. So just FYI, we've made it to the 100 mark.
We get asked quite often, actually. At least I know I do, and I've heard Gyi get asked a couple of times as well about, should I start a podcast for my law firm? Is this something I'm hearing about or thinking about, or what would I do? And my advice to people is generally, you probably shouldn't start a podcast. Maybe, but the answer is really, who is your audience? Like all of the who questions. What are you going to talk about? Who are you going to talk to? How long are you going to do this? Do you have the time to actually commit to this process? Because as you know, with recording these in batches, because you have limited time, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of thought. And once you start putting these things out there, if you do, 6 episodes and then stop doing an episode for 6 months, it's not something that people can really rely on. And it's not something that people can keep coming back to and expect that they're always going to get new information from you. So they'll just fall off and won't have the long-term effect that you actually are trying to build.
Oh, I'm 100% agree with that. Consistency, in my opinion, is key. Even if, as I mentioned, that the quality of the episodes at the beginning, and maybe even now, aren't the greatest, but if somebody can expect your garbage to come, every Monday at 8 in the morning, I still think that they appreciate that. So when the client is looking for an attorney, they see, 90 episodes and it's come out every week, that means something. So I'm 100% on board with that. For us, and this is because it's a video podcast, an audio podcast, I think, would be a several degrees less time intensive, but I'm about 90 minutes per episode in terms of the time I put into it, because at this point now, I no longer edit the videos myself, and I no longer essentially solicit guests. I have a VA that I hired from Upwork to do that. So it's not quite as expensive as you would think to have somebody, basically you give them input of hey, let's get somebody on the podcast for XYZ, go find them. And they'll go out and do that. So at this point now, 2 years, 90 episodes in, that's where we're at. They research, solicit the guests. She prepares the outlines for me based on my input. And then she handles the social media engagement after the episode has been basically edited and uploaded.
I think that's really smart. The other thing too, that just kind of reiterate, and you had mentioned this already, but so many lawyers get in this mindset of direct response marketing, right? It's like the old school, you put a billboard up or a TV spot up and you put a tracking phone number and someone calls you. And I think that, as you had mentioned, you're not doing it necessarily just for the direct response, even though that's great when people are searching and they're coming and finding answers and that kind of stuff. But it's validating you as an expert in your niche. And it's the other thing that it does is, one of the things that people always talk about is when they're hiring a lawyer, it's people, especially if you don't have a lot of experience and don't know a lot of lawyers, it's a scary process. They're dealing with something, in this particular instance of, a loved one is injured in a nursing home. It's a difficult and emotional time. And the other thing that I think that the video does that I think it's important for listeners to keep in mind is that it gives you a sense of who you are and what you're like and what your advocacy looks like in a way that whether it's a blog post or even just audio podcast doesn't do. And so I think that's thinking about it that way is really smart, and I think is a tremendous value in terms of persuading people that you're the right lawyer for them.
Oh yeah, that's one of the many values in terms of the podcast itself. But another one is the fact that I don't know everything, right? I mean, like I know how to track cases and things like that, but I might not know what every sign of sepsis is, or that depending on how you lay on the bed, you might get a bed sore on your elbow. These type of things. So it's almost like a little arts degree that you're getting by every week talking 30 minutes to an expert in a particular field about a particular subject matter. Now, a lot of the stuff we do know because that's what we do. But every week I'm learning something and I'm adding it to my my repertoire, so to speak. So that's another benefit, which hopefully in the next year or so, I'm planning it for hopefully 2020, but compiling the information into a book. I mean, it's basically I'm soliciting free content from people, however many pages, 30 minutes of speaking is, I can put it all together and edit it down. And that's another value from the podcast itself. But in terms of the recognition from the clients, the video FAQs that we do, not the podcast, but the video FAQs, absolutely. When the client comes in, they are extremely familiar with us. They know us very well. Because obviously we are ourselves in the videos as much as we can be because you're reading from a teleprompter. But almost all of our clients that have seen the video FAQs that have found us online come in saying, I've watched 10 of the FAQs and I feel like I know you. We get that a lot.
Oh, that's perfect. That's exactly what you want video to do for you. So you mentioned the teleprompter for those FAQ videos. I want to know, and I'm sure our guests want to know what your process is for creating each video podcast episode. Like where do you guys start and all the way through to your VA helping get everything online with social media?
Okay. So again, the videos podcasts are all 30 minutes a piece and what we do is record 8 in one day. Most of the time it's 8. Sometimes we'll do 9. Sometimes we'll do 7. And that's scheduled ahead of time with the VA, but I'll start with the actual production day is what we call it. So we have a section of our office, which is we share an office building with like 8 other attorneys. And the average age of the attorney in our building, hopefully nobody's listening, is about 150. So there's a library. There's literally a library in our office and it's wood paneled and it's carpeted. So it's off the street. So it's perfect for us. So with the recording process is all done by me and my law partner. Our video camera is a Dixia HFR20. It was probably $200 6 years ago. I've got 2, they're called LE500 studio lights. Those are like bright lights. I just turn those on, which if you watch our FAQs or videos, I'm terrible at lighting. That's something I probably need to brush up on because there's always shadows, but as long as you're well lit, it's all good. And then I bought for the podcast, they're called Hale PR40s. I have 2 of those. They're for the microphones for Will and I. And that goes into a mixer, which is a Behringer mixer. And then from the mixer, it goes into the camera. It's not analog because it's digital, but I don't record into a computer. I record into the video camera itself. So the audio and the video is captured together, goes into the camera, and from the camera, it goes into the computer. In order to get the phone call, to get the guest in, the video podcast is not video with the guest. I'm working on that for next year. It'll probably be through Skype and recording the person on the other end. For right now, they just call in. And so that's handled through the mixer, goes in the camera, blah, blah, blah. We use Adobe Premiere Pro to actually edit. So that's the actual production. In terms of getting the clients on, I have an open tab with the VA. These are some of the topics that I want to address. And sometimes I'll know the person that I want. I'll just say, contact, Mrs. Jane Smith. Sometimes it's something along the lines of, there's some professor out there in some university that would love to talk about this. Find them. Like, for example, I'm trying to book a guest to talk about aspiration pneumonia. So that's all that the VA will have to go on. I want to talk about aspiration pneumonia, get a professor, and she'll go out and do that. And so by the time that the production day comes around, we have 8 guests lined up from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., whatever it is. And we have our list of questions that the VA has provided for me that I've looked at prior. So I've got about 20 minutes per episode before the production day of looking over the outline that the VA has prepared. And then, so we come into the podcast super fresh. It's not like I've done a whole bunch of research on the topic. I want it to be a conversation, right? And that's kind of how it works. And then afterwards, the raw video goes to somebody from Upwork to edit the video. And then it comes back, and then it goes back to the producer, and she uploads it to the social media. And aside, it's another stupid thing that we do. At the very beginning of the podcast, whenever an edit would need to be made, we would look off camera and say to a fake producer named Gene that we just came up with that name, Gene, can you do X, Y, and Z? So we always mention Gene whenever we can, even though that person doesn't exist, but just to make it seem like this was produced professionally. The cat's out of the bag on that. But anyway, that's how it goes. I mean, like, and the episode goes to the person to transcribe. I got somebody from Upwork that transcribes stuff for very, very cheap. But the transcription is probably about $20 an episode. The video editing is probably about $50 an episode. And then based on the amount of time on average the VA spends soliciting the guests, producing the outlines, and doing the social media afterwards, it's probably about $100 to $150 an episode. So like I said, if you do it yourself or if you don't do video, it will be much cheaper than that. So the cost on that shouldn't scare anybody out there. You can definitely do it on your own if you want to, but yeah, don't do video unless you're really committed to it, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, the only thing I can say as far as the cost goes is we, of course, have an editor, and he is not crazy expensive, but he is amazing. And I'm not just saying that because he'll be editing this episode. It is so worth it for us to have invested in a really good editor, because I know a bit about how to do podcast editing. I've done that before, but it would take me 3 times as long, if not more, to do it than it takes him. And he's great. So well worth it for people if you're thinking about this to at the very least, get an editor.
Yeah, because I mean, like, it took me forever to edit these. It took me about 30 or 40 episodes to figure out how to produce the episodes such that somebody editing could easily make the edits. So, for example, me and Will, we cuss like sailors. And so sometimes that gets in there. Sometimes we get mad at each other. We start yelling at each other. Whatever the edit is needed, I would have to literally just watch the episode and make the edits until I realized that I don't have to do that. So I have like a little blue flag that I lay on my desk. And whenever there's an edit that we made, I wave it in the air. And then it took about 15 episodes to realize that that's not as effective as what the editor now is looking at, is where it sits on the desk. If you can imagine, isn't that funny? It's like not the waving of the blue flag to signal the edit, but when he's skimming it, he just notices that it's laying differently on the table.
Oh, that is so smart.
And that's how he knows to make
that. That is so cool. Wow. I love
that's something, if somebody out there is listening and wants to do a video podcast, I just saved you a whole bunch of time, because that took forever, because now you can edit the video very quickly based on that.
So one of the things, looking at the titles of your videos, that came to mind for me were potential ethical issues, just with any discussing any cases you have, any questions that you get, whether it's the idea that you could be giving legal advice or talking about your cases. So can you talk about that and how you guys get around that, or how you avoid any potential issues?
Hopefully no ethics advisors are listening, but that's never been a real big concern for Will or I. From a broad standpoint, I feel like when you're in the gray area, the community benefits better from me doing that and potentially, crossing lines than it does for me not doing the podcast at all. So other than providing a disclaimer at the end of the podcast, which is that nothing that we say is legal advice, and other than providing disclaimers as we talk about things. So, for example, we have episodes called "What is the statute of limitations for personal injury cases in Georgia?" And we'll say the law says 2 years, XYZ. Here are situations that it could be longer or it could be shorter, but always call a lawyer to make absolutely sure. And that we usually say things like that. We try to couch it in terms of like, listen, if you need a specific answer to your specific question, you need to call in or call somebody. But other than that, we don't really address that.
Yeah, don't get me started.
Hopefully that's not the wrong. Yeah, hopefully that's not the wrong answer.
You're talking, as far as I'm concerned, and again, I'm not an ethics attorney, or nor do I sit on an ethics panel, but I think the point that you make, that the benefits far outweigh the risks, and frankly, a lot, and I don't not even speak specifically of Georgia, but there are many states that they need to revisit the way that they're even implementing some of these rules, because they just don't work. Having to have disclaimers on tweets and that kind of stuff, and sending web pages in for pre-approval to state bars is crazy to me. But I think that I don't want to speak for Kelly, but one of the things that always comes up is people get so scared, and so they get this like they're paralyzed because they're like, oh, I kind of can't get in trouble with the state bar. And I think, like you said, having disclaimers is smart, and not talking about, obviously you want to be sensitive to client confidences and all that kind of stuff, just like you would in the real world. But on balance, the benefit of being able to connect and put this content out there not only just benefits the community in general, but it's this is where we are in the world, and I think it's a matter of, in a lot of instances, of the bar associations playing catch up.
That's right. And specifically, as you said, like with regard, we don't give client names, you know what I mean? And generally, another ongoing joke with the podcast is we always provide the hypothetical Miss Johnson. So we'll say, the case with Miss Johnson, where blah, 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 Miss Johnson is a fictional character that we made up to put into hypothetical. So you're absolutely right. I mean, I like to think that the world is better off with our humble little podcast than it would be without it, because we're scared about any type of providing unauthorized legal advice, things like that.
Thoroughly impressed. Keep up the great work. Certainly. We should, for people that want to see what you're doing and connect with you, how do you prefer people go about connecting with you online? Or if you do it all, I don't want to be presumptuous.
People can check us out at nursinghomeabusepodcast.com. That's about the simplest way. And that's going to fast forward you to, I don't even know what I just said fast forward you to. It's going to transport you. I don't know. You're going to end up on a website from there. So that's going to redirect you. This guy has a podcast we talk about. No, nursinghomeabusepodcast.com is the easiest way that you're going to be able to find me, and you can connect with us from there. And if anybody has any questions, I can talk about this stuff all day. I love it. It's super fun for me. My background, the reason why I even have a camera mixer stuff, I was in a band for a long time. So I do have a little bit of a analog technical knowledge of how these things work. So that kind of helped me from the beginning, but I'll talk about this stuff all day.
Very cool. I do actually have one non-legal marketing related topic question for you, because I saw in your bio that you are known to play a little Texas Hold'em and enjoy the city of Las Vegas. And I also enjoy the city of Las Vegas. I'm not a big gambler unless you count $20 in a slot machine, but I really like Vegas. So do you have any favorite casinos there or anything I should check out on my next trip to Vegas?
Yes, I do.
Awesome.
I generally play cards in the Venetian because they have a really good food court that's cheap. You know what I mean? Not like one of the pricey restaurants. And the bathrooms are really close to the poker room. So even though you're not going to go play poker, just so you know, that's how that works. But there used to be the Sahara, and I think that's called SLS, but I think they might have changed their name again. But that's a really awesome place because there's Umami Burger, and Umami Burger is a really good burger place. But they also have a new restaurant that's a steak restaurant. I think it's called Bazaar. I can't remember.
Oh, is that the Jose Andres Bazaar meat?
Yes, I ate there. It was amazing. It was really awesome. But those are the two places that I would say if you went. Like, there used to be a really cool place when I was in law school that when I was completely broke and you could gamble with $20 forever. It was called Slots of Fun, and that's next to Circus, which I don't know if it exists anymore. But it was like they had like penny slots and dollar craps. They used to have dollar craps. Anyway, that's where I used to go. And they have a Subway sandwich. They used to have a Subway sandwich shop right in there. And now, like, to this day, if I smell a Subway, I think about playing dollar craps.
Well, if it is still in existence, I am definitely going to check it out, because not only did I say I like slots, my husband has a very specific slot machine strategy that all I can remember is it has to be, actually, I don't even remember. Anyway, my husband has a very specific slot machine strategy, and I just tell him to find the one I'm supposed to go to, and I go and I play my $20, and I usually win a little bit, not much, but a little bit, and then I'm happy.
Well, if you're winning a little bit, then you're really winning a little bit. You know what I mean? That's awesome. If you're leaving with any money, that's a victory.
Yes. In fact, at the Lawyer-nomics conference this year, Gyi and I might have done a little bit of, I played some slots. He played whatever that other fun one is that you can only play there. And see, this is how much of a gambler I am. And I did like quadruple my money that I put in. So I was very happy.
Quit while you're ahead.
That sounds fantastic. I don't think I've ever played a slot in my life.
I do quit while I'm ahead, Gyi. That is exactly my strategy.
We cracked the casino.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, speaking of quitting while you're ahead.
Yes, we should probably do that. But
you're a pro.
That was good. See, you can tell you're a professional.
That's right. I got 90 episodes of trying to find the right segue to end a program. It's very difficult.
And that was a perfect one. And thank you so much for joining us and for reaching out to me. Of course, everyone, as always, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We love that. Or if you still call it iTunes, that's fine too. And reach out to us on Twitter. Gyi and I are both available there, or our Attorney Sync profile, or anywhere else you could find us.
Rob, thanks so much again. Take care. If you find yourself in Chicago, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll see you online.
Thank you, guys.